Welcome back to Bastard Sword. I'm Drew.
Welcome back. I'm Josh. Thank you for joining us.
So we are back after a slight podcasting sabbatical. Just giving ourselves a little bit of time to get caught up on recording and on editing and on being functional adults. So thanks for bearing with us.
Yeah, getting our lives in order, taking care of our kids, getting our mental health in check, doing all of that. Just trying to stay on top of it. You know how it goes.
Just trying to be functional adults.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's verdict's out on how successful we've been.
I think we're doing all right, man. I'm
we're
proud
back
of us.
to talk about. We're doing good. We fucking got this.
Yeah.
And now we're back to talk about games and things that we talk about on the Bastard Sword podcast. Hey Josh, what are we going to be talking about?
Games? No, I don't know. You kind of have broken down this angle of some games that it looks like on the horizon they are just bad games from the get-go, and then they have questionable reputations. So, you know, I'm gonna follow you on this one, and we're gonna see where you're trying to take the conversation here. I'm just a guest on this podcast at this point. I just hang out.
We're all guests. The podcast is just kind of, it does what it's going to do, and we try to follow it wherever that may be.
Yeah.
And this week, so I had an idea. Concord came out recently. It's been probably about a month now, I think. By the time this comes out, time is convoluted in podcast land.
Yeah.
But it had me thinking about how we live in what I am calling the age of flops. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about all of these games that have come out. A lot of it really was happening this year, although it goes back, I'd say, a little bit further than that.
It's kind of astounding the level it's happening at right now, though.
Right. Yeah, there are so many of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just these like slow moving disasters that have been in the public's eye, and like no one has any confidence that they're going to be a success at all. Like from the moment these games are shown off, everyone's just like, well, that's going to fail. And then they do. And it's just a very interesting phenomenon that I thought we could spend some time digging into. Before we get into that, though, just kind of a recap of what we have coming up soon. I think we put out a little announcement a while back before we went on break talking about all the spooky games that we're going to be talking about coming up pretty soon. We're rolling into that season. Josh, you want to kind of remind people of what those were?
Yeah, we're going to deep dive. We're going to break down. We're going to question the ethics of all of these games. No, we're going to talk about Disco Elysium, a little bit of murder mystery. I think it counts as spooky enough for the Halloween season. So
there's some spooky stuff.
Yeah. There's
some spooky things in Disco Elysium. The human brain is terrifying.
There's murder mystery. There's enough to get something going there. So we'll talk a little bit about Disco Elysium. I should be refreshed on it by now. This is me talking in the past to my future self. So we'll see. The Last of Us Part 2. I've wanted to talk to Drew about this one for a while. He should be caught up on it as well. And then we're going to break down the Resident Evil series, starting with Resident Evil 5 and 6. And then we might segue into Resident Evil 7 and Village, depending on how many of those games we've managed to play in a month. It's all to be determined in this podcast.
Yeah, just jumping right into the games in the series that everyone hates, kind of our standard that we're establishing here when I make us cover Dark Souls 2 as our first proper Souls game.
Yes, exactly. We're gonna start where it hurts, but I don't know. Like you said, I think Resident Evil 5 is kind of great, and we'll have our final thoughts on that soon, but I'm enjoying the co-op playthrough right now. It is bananas, but it is still fun. It's a fun game,
yeah,
so I can't complain.
It's great. Yeah, it has a lot of very good qualities that are not typical Resident Evil good qualities. Like I kind of love it so far. It's so just over the top and goofy and very fun in a way that Resident Evil games typically aren't. I love the Resident Evil games I've played. I'm kind of behind on them, as I mentioned last time we recorded, but I love them for different reasons than I love 5. It's worth coddling. It's worth heaping some praise on.
Yeah.
Resident Evil 5 it's a poor, forgotten, but good Resident Evil.
And maybe we can challenge that with 6 as well. We'll see. I don't know. 6 was a lot for me when I first played it through, so.
Yeah, verdict's still out on 6, but we'll get there in time. It was kind of a bit of a flop when it released, as I can recall, which is a perfect segue into that thing I was just talking about a minute ago. The flops of the century. So this is going to be kind of loose. I mean, I had some ideas that I just kind of wanted to brain dump out here and bounce off of you, Josh, and you, the listeners, of course, and just like yell back at whatever device you're listening to this on.
Just scream into your phone about Concord.
Just scream at the phone. Exactly. I'm so mad about Concord. I'm curious if Concord is even going to continue to exist by the time we release this. Like, I don't know what state it's going to be in. So, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to just jump right into it. Like, I don't even think the relationship with this game, like, if you want to talk about, like, the broader community is, like, really, it doesn't seem to be contentious. It's not like Kill the Justice League where everyone's, like, irately pissed with it. There was just no interest in the game. No matter like how much they were trying to like build and market it, it just did not land for anyone. And I think it's interesting now that there's like this whole wave of the community that just like isn't even mad, isn't even like saying a whole lot, just kind of ignores a game like this. And it shows with the player base right now. The player count is weak.
Yeah. So it launched to less than 1,000 concurrent players on Steam, which is lower than Suicide Squad was, and is just absolutely abysmal for a big, I wouldn't quite call it a tentpole game, but I mean, the studio was purchased by Sony well into the development of the game, and it's a first-party Sony published game. Like, it has some money and some esteem behind it, and just launched to absolute crickets. It just nothing at all. Just to, I guess, kind of spoil my thesis for these games too, is that by all accounts, all the discourse I've seen around the game itself is that it's actually pretty good. Like, it's not bad. It's not, setting the world on fire. It doesn't do anything amazing, but it has some okay ideas and solid fundamentals. Like, it's not a bad game. It's just something that, like, was, let's call it a severe misallocation of resources is kind of how I'm viewing this.
Yeah. Even as a hero shooter, I just kind of wonder if it's the presentation, the design of the characters. I mean, I feel like there wasn't a lot to personally too. Like, I feel like there wasn't a lot to be roped in there to admire or enjoy or be interested in from the get-go, especially when it looked so much like Guardians of the Galaxy. We kind of have already discussed that whole aspect of it, but I just don't know. Like, even as an adventure game, would people give a shit? But
I just don't think so. It's just
if
so
the gameplay isn't that engaging, then what can you do?
Right. And even if the gameplay was more engaging, like we'll talk about with some of the other games, but it's just so fundamentally like nothing as an idea, or that might be a little bit mean, but it's just,
it's very derivative.
And that's fine. Like, derivative things can exist, but it's just so like bland. There's just nothing there for anyone to hook onto, and it just came so late, which is I think a consistent theme with the few games that I had in mind to talk about as an example, that this game was apparently in development for like 8 years. And it weirdly, like, out of the games that we're going to talk about, it feels the least cynical to me. Like, I don't actually buy it as necessarily like a corporate cash grab. Apparently, the story of this is that the developers, were working on this for a long time. 8-year development cycle, got purchased somewhere around the 6th year of that by Sony. So apparently they were impressed enough by what they were doing. But that reads to me as this wasn't necessarily like top down, like corporate suits at Sony saying, no, you have to do a live service hero shooter game. It apparently at some point was a game that these people wanted to make. And, from the descriptions I've seen of the gameplay and everything, I have not played this game. It sounds like, there was an amount of passion and care put into the systems, into the core gameplay loop and everything. It's by all accounts a totally fine game that's well made and competent. It's just such a fundamentally unsellable, untenable idea that should have been stopped long time before it got to the point that it is, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's it's interesting that they've doubled down in all this time, and then they've canceled projects that seem like they would have had potential, like the Last of Us online game. And like what Sony does is questionable to begin with, but and for this game to have an impact that it's like has an episode in the secret level show, which is going to be like Amazon's anthology series. It covers like different games, and it will, I guess, have like the licensing to actually have episodes based on video games. So that's cool. I'm really excited for Mega Man. Like at what point did they not think like it was too late? And a lot of people have pointed that out too. Like maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, this could have been a hit. It could have been popular. It could have been a good alternative before everyone got totally weary of Overwatch and games like that. So yeah, I'm not sure. This one is such an odd one for me.
I know there's just so many odd choices, just starting with, the design of the game itself, just kind of being stretched out over such a huge development cycle that it became completely obsolete by the time it was even revealed. And then it's just this weird question of, do you just cut your losses and cancel the game? Because it was so obvious when this was announced at I think that was the Sony State of Play. We talked about it on the show.
Yeah.
My reaction to it was that this basically looks like nothing. And that was the consensus across the internet.
No one cared. It looked so generic. And, I wonder with the timing too, if they were like, that Guardians of the Galaxy money, this shit's hot right now, we weren't totally worn out on like the Avengers tropes yet. Maybe.
Right.
I don't know. What is time?
Odd decisions, odd situation, which I'll come back to that in a bit. Really, there have been, I guess, 4 major examples that I think of this year that, or I guess probably within the past year. I don't know that all of these are this year specifically, but the next one, you've already mentioned it a little bit, was Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. Yep. And this was a similar situation. Like, the internet has been actively hostile towards this game for a very, very long time. Like, there has been anti-hype for this game for longer than the entire hype cycle, longer than the entire development cycle of older games, but longer than like the entire hype cycle of most newer games. And it's, again, just a series of absolutely baffling decisions that, to me, seem to come down to just like a completely misguided choice of what game and what type of video game to make at the very beginning. I don't suppose you haven't played this, have you?
I have not. I haven't bothered to touch it. Yeah, I mean, I suspect there was some investor manipulation. There was some milking to try to make this game more profitable, and it definitely shows with like the episodic structure of it. But yeah, I don't know that I would even attempt it if it came out for free. Maybe just to talk about it and to know a little bit more, but I've only seen other reviews and reactions and things like that.
Yeah, it is intensely off-putting to me. I cannot think of a game that is less appealing to what I enjoy from video games, and it has so many things working against it and so many weird decisions. Like it's coming from, of course, a developer who made their name on these big single player games that were the complete opposite of this in every way, and presentation, gameplay, overall design philosophy could not be more opposed to this. So complete 180, completely obvious to everyone for years ahead of release that it was going to tank. Came out, it did, no one was surprised. And again, I have actually seen fairly positive reactions to this from people who have actually played it. Like, apparently the movement and gameplay and character abilities are pretty refined and fun. Like, it's, from what I understand, a fairly fluid game that feels good in the hands to play and is not like completely unsalvageable. It's not something that's completely without merit. It's just a game that literally no one fucking wanted them to make.
Yeah.
Like it's the complete opposite of what people were looking for. And it is so kind of bizarre how far off the mark it was. And another one of those situations where it's like, at what point do you just cut your losses and move on to something else?
Right. I mean, well, yeah, they had a rocky development cycle. It got delayed like multiple times. I think they had showed some stuff like years ago and then like totally scrapped like a lot of that, like refined everything, revised everything. Which, I will say, yeah, it is a good looking game. Like the cutscenes look fine. I've heard the gameplay is pretty decent, but the gameplay loop itself is not very fun, engaging, especially with how, I guess, like short this segment of the game is. And then there's like almost no post game is what I've heard. So yeah, I don't know. I think the Gotham Knights thing is important to bring into this conversation because I feel like everyone's reputation or the trust was destroyed with that game to start, even though it wasn't the same developer, obviously. And, everyone wants an Arkhamverse game. They want a new Batman sequel type single player game. So, and I do too. I want that shit, but
right, yeah.
I totally get why everyone would be mad about that. Especially when it's just like, that's what your customer base expects from you. And you're just like, no, we're not going to try to deliver something like that at all because we can't milk it. But this is, again, it's backfired. Like these practices of like free to play, monetized games, episodic content, DLC, season pass. This shit just, it'll push a lot of players out. And, I brought up the numbers here into the notes. They're down to like 500 concurrent players. When it launched, it was up to at least like 13,000. But,
right.
And that's just for Steam. That probably doesn't account for the fact that it's free on Epic Games and maybe people are playing it there, but pretty bad for...
I really don't think they are.
Yeah, like it's pretty bad for a game that came out like fairly recently, if we're talking about this year, but yeah, it's a mess. And I think it's bad business practice with a lot of this shit. It's they want it to sell in a certain way, but they can't force the market, like they can't force the consumer to actually care, especially when everyone's screaming angry at them.
Especially when the model has already proven to fail dozens of times before this. Like it came out after the live service season pass microtransaction bubble had burst a long time ago. Like Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3 were the biggest runaway success stories of the last 2 years, and those are both just huge content complete single player games without any of the bullshit of this. It's which I'll kind of harp on that point a little bit more here in a bit, but yeah, it also doesn't help that this game particularly was so like aggressive and kind of confrontational towards what the players were wanting. Like I don't give a shit. I'm just gonna spoil because like who cares? It's Suicide Squad. But the way they just shamelessly kill the Batman, the canonical Batman from the Arkhamverse games, just as kind of a hey, fuck you guys. Like we know this is what built our company, but you know we don't care. Fuck off. This is what we're doing now. It's kind of a slap in the face to the people. That's not the kind of thing that I would get upset about, but like that's going to make a lot of capital G gamer Americans very angry.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to that comic book shit where they kill off, you know, there's scenario, alternate universe type stories where maybe like Harley Quinn does kill Batman and everyone else or some dumb shit like that. But it's not, I think the problem with this is the way they presented it in that it doesn't resolve within the span of its game. Because like, I think there was an assumption that, you know, this was an alternate universe or some things would be repaired by the end of the game. And because it's episodic, they've cut a lot of that out, or maybe that was all they had of Kevin Conroy's role. I'm not really sure, but they could easily remedy that with a little bit of like having it be a complete story. But yeah, just making a game where it's like, haha, we're killing Batman after, you know, the fact that Kevin Conroy just recently passed did not help at all. They probably didn't see that one coming. So
no, yeah, and I mean there are ways they could pull that and make it work. It just I don't think there was any way to make it work within the framework of this game that's like, hey, remember that universe that you have absolutely loved and were invested in for like a decade and a half? Well, it's a live service looter shooter now, and also we just killed that Batman.
Yeah, and when you're kind of doing like the Brainiac stuff too, it would have made sense to have like Batman be like the one surviving Justice League member or something, you know. But they wrote what they wrote and people were not happy about it. I was gonna say there's the precedent with these games too. Like Exoprimal came out in like March. It came out like right before, and like that game kind of released to a lot of sighs and just disinterest in it because it was just an online shooter looter type bullshit, you know?
Yeah. The other big one from this year, I kept saying 4 earlier. I actually had 3 main ones in mind. I just, you know, that 4 is a high number to count to, and I cannot be expected to do that kind of math live on air. So I apologize for that.
Well, we got Kill the Justice League, Concord, Skull and Bones.
Skull and Bones is where I was going.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. The day before seemed to be pretty fucking hyped up.
Yeah, the day before was an interesting one because the first time I learned that existed was when it released and everything blew up. So
yeah, that's what like everyone has been anticipating this game, and I was like, I've never seen anything about this fucking game. I had no idea what it was.
Yeah, so the story of that, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm just kind of going off of memory of a few articles, was that this game had this like crazy impressive trailer. It was this big, you know, post-apocalyptic zombie survival type situation, kind of The Last of Us looking, but very ambitious looking, graphically impressive, and had all these great ideas. And I think, was it a Kickstarter project?
Yeah, it must have been. Like that's the only thing I can tell from that. I'm trying to look up some quick facts real quick.
Yeah, well, while you're doing that to fact check me, I'm just gonna spew out a bunch of probably false bullshit. So yeah, it comes out, and I think it just came out into early access. I don't think it was a full 1.0 release, but even at that point, it was obvious that it had nothing at all to do with any of the material that had been put out. Like, people were calling it a cheap asset flip. I'm not necessarily crazy about that phrase, but for all intents and purposes, that's probably the best description of it. It was just this really like awful, janky, low budget, underbaked thing that had no conceivable pathway of turning into the thing that they had been showing off and promising. Like, it was to the point people were doing all these calls for boycotts and signing all these forms and blah blah blah. The developer, I think, ended up just closing down completely and deleting like all references to the game. It was a pretty
they slammed the door.
Yeah, it was its own league of failure that's kind of interesting and could be a whole case study of its own, but also a little different than these other games we were talking about, because it's something that people thought would be really good but ended up being this big bait and switch, like to the extent that I don't remember another game like being so blatant about it. That kind of thing happens. Like, games come out and they're disappointments. Like, obviously you can look at like No Man's Sky.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was like holding my tongue, trying not to like scream No Man's Sky when you started that sentence. Sky. God damn it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just fucking say it. But yeah, this was just a complete different level of that.
Yeah. Well, so I guess they had announced a gameplay reveal trailer in 2021, like right at the start of the year. And they were like plugging it as a breakthrough for MMO survival. Like, they were trying to get that DayZ bag, I guess. And then they said they had issues like later that year they were trying to transition from Unreal Engine 4 to 5 and kept delaying. So I guess that is kind of like their problem, is they kind of made it seem like this game was ready to go and it was very deep and they had all these systems in place, but they continued to delay it into 2024. And yeah, then around the end of 2023, they started getting like accused of scamming everyone and that they were asset flipping, and I'm guessing someone got a look inside at the game and was not happy. So yeah, it's a bad case for them, especially when they were trying to crowdfund it and do stuff like that. But you'll have that with indie. I think that should be part of the conversation sometimes with indie developers, is just because they're ready to sell you this big elaborate maybe over the top RPG or sim or whatever type of game doesn't mean you should get excited immediately. Because like No Man's Sky, granted it has a lot of those things now, but when it released it was a very basic, disappointing game, and they had to add shit to it over time. So I mean, if you're committed to that, that's something, but I don't think it's good business.
No, yeah, it's the old like Peter Molyneux problem, where he's just promising all of these huge ideas and systems that he just couldn't quite make good on. And that's even with proper industry funding and backing and all of these talented people working with him. Like, making games is hard. It's a lot of work. I can't do it. So yeah, it's awesome when there is an indie success story. But yeah, you have to approach those things with at least a little bit of a critical eye for how realistic it will be for these people to actually accomplish the things they're saying they're going to accomplish.
Yeah. Until you see it on screen, you see the actual gameplay, and it's not pre-rendered or anything like that. I don't hold them to it. It's kind of like we even talked about that with the Red Dead Redemption 2 stuff, because I remember them being like, oh yeah, you're going to be like able to fully interact with NPCs on multiple levels, and it's like, not really. It's more like it's a binary level is what you're saying. It's not like New Vegas or Disco Elysium. Don't try to trick me if you can't fucking show me how that works. And it's the same thing when they promise like, oh, you'll have all these different outcomes in this game. Like Telltale games, like every choice you make matters. And affects the outcome of the story. Like, no, it doesn't.
Does it though?
Shut the fuck up.
Like, I don't know. Yeah. We've talked about some current events and news on here. I wouldn't necessarily say we're like a news focused podcast, but if interesting things are happening, we try to talk about them. But I am very cautious about hype for new things for that reason. Like, it's just, it doesn't really accomplish anything good. Like, I have a very wait and see approach. Like, just once something is out, it has been out for a while and that initial cycle has died down, you can get a much better impression of what it actually, is, like the shape of this thing. And just because it's not doing all the things that were promised doesn't mean, it's a bad thing or whatever. Because there's a lot of examples where these games get, I would say, undue backlash because they don't necessarily line up with the idea that people had hyped up in their minds. And then, that's when you get these like Reddit hidden gem things that pop up 5 years later. Like, actually, this game was really good.
We were just mad at it.
Your Dark Souls 2. Well,
yeah, sure. Why not? No, you're not wrong though. That's how a lot of the community has received it, and it's an ongoing argument. And like, I could see people even going back on like, say, No Man's Sky or something like that as a complete game and going, "Wow, this is fucking awesome. We should have been playing this at the time." You never know, but
everyone loves No Man's Sky now. But I
don't really know anyone that plays it.
That's the thing. I don't either. The internet seems to love it. My son has played it a little bit. I have played it. It seems like something that I really want to like. I have tried it a few different times, and every time, like, I see all these updates about these huge concepts they're introducing and these crazy mechanics everywhere, and then I play the game and I just have to fucking stare at the ground and shoot rocks for 3 hours before I can do anything. I'm like, nope, lasers. Okay, I'm out.
Yeah. That the grind is not, maybe not my kind of grind. I appreciate a grind in the right ways, but I was gonna say too, just to cap that a little bit, like another thing too is like performance. Like, we brought that into question with Black Myth Wukong. I usually question it with any Unreal Engine game, especially like as a day one release. Like, Cyberpunk is a great example. Like, you can have all this stuff and have a really pretty game and maybe have the right system to present it and show everyone how good it looks, but if it doesn't run well on your console on day one, then that's also bad news. So I usually watch out for that. That's kind of why I waited with Black Myth Wukong, even though I thought, like, gameplay wise it looked very interesting to me. So
yeah, and this is probably going off on a tangent, but I was actually just watching some footage of Star Wars Outlaws, which, I could probably talk a little bit about that at some point. But anyway, Digital Foundry put out their video recently doing the full tech dive, and that game, like, it has real intense FSR, the like upscaling, and is really noticeable and kind of ugly and how severe it is, and just has, overall it looks like it has pretty solid performance, but just some issues like that make me think those things I appreciate when the next generation is out, especially with how like fluid generations are now, when I can get a PlayStation 6 or the Xbox probably won't exist by then, but when I can get like a PlayStation 6 and they just release an update patch, and then it actually has the 4K 60 that people seem to pretend that this generation was going to have for games.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's so much more incremental as we go forward here. It's just adding and touching up little things and more power for like depth and draw distance and textures. But what I'm hearing about that game is it's just boring. Like, and I think you had said something to me about that too, but I saw like other people being like, yeah, I got this game. Yeah, it's kind of not fun.
I know.
They don't hate it. They're not even mad at about the purchase. They're just like, yeah, I should have known.
So this is probably a conversation I should have with my therapist instead of you, but I don't understand the kind of like mid reactions and the things people are complaining about. Like, oh, this game's actually like really boring and there's not much to do. I see that. I'm like, I kind of want to play this game now.
I think that's like, we talk about this with movies sometimes where like, a bad movie can still be like fucking incredible, but like a boring movie is just boring. Like it's a worse feeling to me. Like, and I don't want to play it. I don't want to be engaged in a game for like fucking 50 hours and just be bored out of my fucking mind. That's how I felt with Final Fantasy 16, trying to do like all the extra shit in that game. I was like, why am I doing this? Because I have a mental illness, but I still had to, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because the reasons people are saying that it's boring sound kind of I don't know that they sound like amazing to me, but it sounds interesting and I'd kind of like to check it out for a different take on the Ubisoft stuff, because apparently the sense I'm getting is that they've toned down a lot of the Ubisoft like map game checklist type of things, and you try to stumble on things a little bit more organically, and you're not just going to one area, climbing a tower, and then clearing out all the icons in the map in that area. And some people are saying that that makes the game feel empty, that it's devoid of content. Other people are saying it's not actually that empty, and there is still stuff to do. It's just not as like obvious and Ubisofty about it. And that, you know, the worlds are beautiful, and it does seem to kind of tone down the busy work and be more of like a vibe of exploring these places, which I don't know. I could maybe be down with that.
Yeah, it could work. I've yet to see like how the main gameplay loop looks, and that was sort of like when they were showing footage of her just riding around and stuff. I was like, so like, what do you do? You know, where's it? And you know, people say that about Death Stranding, that it's boring and empty, but part of that is
they're wrong.
They are wrong. Yeah, it's part of the travel and the vibe and the building and like and hauling stuff, but there's rewards involved in that game loop. So, you know, if it's paced out in a way that's not like, again, constantly doing busy work, that's fine, but there needs to be something on the other end of that, right?
Yeah, and
like
good
Shadow
chance
of the
there's not. Yeah, good chance there's not something with Outlaws. I have that little part of my brain where it's like, people don't like this thing, so I want to like this thing.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe I could find something to love, and then you can shout it from the rooftops like, you guys are wrong.
Exactly.
It's actually an amazing vibe game. I was thinking that too, like when they showed the space stuff and how it kind of like turned into the 70s style like painting of planets like they used in the old movies and stuff, and I was like, dude, that could be a really cool aesthetic to play on. But it, you know, it is just, it's another Star Wars universe type thing, so
yeah, it's not on the top of my list, but right, yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that it's a known quantity right now. I don't mind Star Wars, not the biggest Star Wars guy, but I'm curious to check it out eventually, just given how I don't even know that it's controversial. It seems to be a pretty broad consensus of, it's fine, but I don't know why that makes me want to check it out. But
I'm waiting for you to be like, well, now we have to both get like the Ubisoft subscription so we can play Prince of Persia games in Star Wars.
Yeah, I'm not gonna commit that act of violence on air.
Thank God.
But you know what other Ubisoft thing I was gonna talk about, and I won't spend a whole lot of time on this one. I promise this stuff will tie back together with some general thoughts, because I think there's a trend among these, but Skull and
think
Bones,
it has to.
Oh yeah.
Boats and Hose, yeah.
Boats and Hose. Did you follow this game at all?
No, this was another one that when it came out, like, you know, there was controversy. People were saying that it was pretty bad, and I was just like, I didn't even know this was a thing that was happening. honestly, I think I saw ads for it and thought it was just a mobile game. Like, I thought it was a mobile strategy game or some shit like that. I just didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, it has that look to it. I remember seeing the name floating around forever. This was the pirate game offshoot of Assassin's Creed Black Flag, which was actually pretty good. Like, I've complained about Assassin's Creed on here, but I like Black Flag, and a lot of people really dug the pirate part of it, where you're sailing around, like, raiding, pillaging, pirating things. And so Ubisoft had a perfect opportunity there to just, make the pirate part of it its own game, completely devoid of the Assassin's Creed stuff. And so they seized that opportunity by developing this game in like Singapore for I don't know, what was it, about 10 years or so, spending an obscene amount of money on it, stripping out all of the things that people liked from the Assassin's Creed games, just kind of slowly shoving it out there to die.
This is like the whole aspect of, I don't know, just taking a look at it, like the ship battles and stuff. I didn't enjoy that shit in the Assassin's Creed games. I think they introduced it in Assassin's Creed 3 and then, Black Flag and all that. And yeah. I hated it. I like it about as much as I like the Batmobile shit in Arkham Knight.
Yeah, so this ended up basically being a much simpler and worse version of Sea of Thieves, like 5 years after Sea of Thieves came out. Another one of those situations where this could have been kind of novel on its own if it had come out originally, well, like in any kind of a reasonable amount of time. But by the time it did, there was just no need for it to exist because there was already something else that did what it was trying to do, but a lot better. They also made a bunch of very odd gameplay decisions. Like, I think the most damning thing I saw about this is that you don't play as the pirate, you play as a boat, which is
exactly
the big thing that people loved with Assassin's Creed Black Flag was that the whole pirate thing, like you raid these villages and like when you are, attacking these other boats, you actually board them and you like jump from boat to boat and you have these sword fights on them. It was kind of cool. I mean, it had its moments. I wasn't like, completely over the top in love with it, but it had some cool ideas. But instead of expanding on those, they just simplified them down to, well, you're going to drive this boat and you're going to be this boat. And you can kind of shoot other boats sometimes, and maybe you can like dock at a place and upgrade the boat, but you are the boat. And it's just, I don't know. There was no real hook. It was just boring, and there was like not really anything there. And it was kind of, go ahead.
I was going to say, just like the boat stuff, like even I just watched a clip where they go up and loot their ship and then destroy it. And it's just like a quick cutscene. Which is fine, right. But it seems like it would be like an in-depth ship pirate simulator. Like we have those games, we've seen those games, but it's not.
It would be fine if elaborate. They did not already have a much better version of that in the game that they were taking from 10 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And then the whole third-person open world aspect that works really well in Black Flag and just is just absent. It also looks incredibly like AA. Like it looks like one of those games that has like decent graphics. It's not bad, but you can tell it's not quite on the level of like AAA games coming out right now.
Well, it's not a AAA game. It is a quadruple A game.
Yeah, it's fucking huge, but I don't
where
understand why. Who asked for this?
This is where that quadruple A game meme came from, for anyone that wasn't familiar, because this game was just like obscenely expensive to develop. They put so much money into it, I'm assuming just because they changed directions on it so many times. And so because of that, part of the marketing push was that Ubisoft called it the world's first quadruple A game. And apparently there's some weird like contractual reasons that it was finally released in the state that it was in. They, I guess, had some sort of agreement with the Singaporean government in order to like develop the game there. I don't know. They had some kind of incentives that required them actually release it. And so they did, but it also was one of those things that was like people knew it existed for a long time, but no one had seen what it would actually look like. And then by the time they did, it was met with like the world's most resounding okay.
Yeah, like just again, like total disinterest, not and that was, I guess, that relates to you and I too. Like when I see this shit, I'm just like, oh, they did that, okay. And that's, I guess that's sort of been my attitude toward a lot of these companies for a while. Like, let's say Ubisoft and Activision, sometimes Bethesda. I mean, they're not like the worst offender, but yeah, like you see they're working these projects and really trying to market them, and they do the shows and they get their awkward little people to come out there and be like, talk with their hands and describe their game, and you're just like, no, this is horrible. This is so bad. Yeah, I just don't get it. I don't understand what made them think this was gonna work, especially when it's built in with microtransactions and stuff like
right,
that.
Yeah, which, it is kind of a common denominator across all these things, but all these games, so like Concord, Suicide Squad, Skull and Bones, like these things are all, so obvious that they were going to fail for months, if not years before release. Like there's just this slow moving disaster that no one is excited about. In some cases, they're actively hostile towards. And it seems like that, to me, feels like a unique phenomenon that has kind of like come about as these development costs are just skyrocketing and these development times are just shooting out to years bordering on decades. Like it doesn't feel like this particular type of flop is a thing that happened in the past. The earliest one I can think of is probably Anthem, which was pretty troubled and kind of met with a lot of apprehension going into it. That was another situation similar to Suicide Squad where it was this big... Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, at least it looked like something people wanted. It had that really cool Iron Man suit. That whole aspect of it did look appealing, but the game within was not.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I never played Anthem, but that was the sense I got as well, that it had at least a fun gameplay hook that could have become something, but just didn't because it was the wrong type of game. Like, right. I feel like if BioWare had made a BioWare type game with that flying Iron Man simulator at the core of it, people would have loved that.
Exactly, yeah, it would have been totally different.
Yeah, but they didn't. It was another one of these live service disasters that quit existing after, I don't remember the exact time frame, but it was very soon after release, which, I mean, there's, a lot to read into that. Like, there have been a lot more live service games that have failed than games that have succeeded. The only ones that really ended up being big successes are like Fortnite, obviously, and Destiny for a while, although that kind of failed. I mean, Ubisoft had a little bit of it with The Division, but that's kind of its own thing, too. I think that's slowed down some as well. But like the big thing with these, they were not manufactured successes, which I guess sounds kind of weird coming, to say about these like billion-dollar companies putting out these products, but like Fortnite was a failing game that they just tacked on a PUBG clone to that ended up fucking exploding. Destiny was like the first game to do that kind of thing, and it was a very odd and unique product that people were real interested in because it was coming off of Halo.
Yeah, the Halo hype was real, especially at that time. It wasn't so disconnected as, they were like side-by-side franchises.
Yeah, and the other ones that have kind of at least built a, worthwhile audience, like something that can actually maintain the game, is like you mentioned Helldivers 2 earlier. That was another first-party Sony game that sort of came out of nowhere. Like it didn't seem to have a big marketing push behind it, and it didn't seem like something that even the developers or Sony would have expected to hit the level that it did.
Right, but it worked pretty well. I mean, it is for despite the controversy and the patches and stuff like that. I mean, I think they've kept it pretty damn consistent.
Yeah, like from what I understand, that game still has a pretty healthy community, which is cool. But it also just kind of reinforces that you just can't really manufacture that kind of thing. There's kind of some push and pull there with this long tail of support on games where it almost feels like, I don't know, if a game is built specifically for that, it's kind of destined to fail. And I know that's probably not true, but that's almost what it feels like. Like any of these games that are built to just be a platform to throw content at seems to be a huge case of like putting the cart before the horse, where any of these success stories are like, it's good to build in that ability to support the game long term, but to, you know, put that above creating a good product is, I don't know, not the way to go.
You look at a game like, I don't know, I would scale back to like something like Risk of Rain 2, or, you know, just a game that pretty much comes out nearly complete and has enough content to keep it cycling through and then add stuff to it, not sell the game with this intention of parsing it out in these like $40 increments or whatever. And that's what's, you know, with those indie developers, they're able to just kind of tack content on if they're nice enough to do that. You get Helldivers 2, like adding mechs and little things as it's progressed. So yeah, you can't like expect people to be playing that game on that same game loop 2 years later and still have interest in it if there isn't enough substance there to keep you there in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay for a game to be a contained experience, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, yeah, that's, I don't know, that's how media operates. Most media that people consume is not something that they're returning to every day of their lives for years at a time.
Or you have something like Minecraft that is procedurally generated in a good way or is flexible enough to keep rolling and like have people be creative in it or something like that, which you're just not going to have in a shooter.
Yeah, and that's another thing that was a wildly unexpected success. Like, Notch ended up being Notch, but like he was just a semi-regular dude just putting out a little like indie project on forums that ended up just absolutely exploding and turning into Minecraft. So that's not something that you can really manufacture.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hadn't necessarily intended to just dunk on live service games, although I am always down to do that. But like,
it seems relevant.
Kind of, it is relevant, but I don't even know, you know, if the live service aspect is necessarily like integral to why some of these big games have failed like that. I know certainly the market is just sick of that sort of thing. But it almost seems like, I don't know how much of it is greed, like the sunk cost fallacy, or just like a natural result of expanding development scope. But it's just, it seems to be a symptom of how unsustainable the, I guess, development cycle is, where these things that normally, like, I don't know, a decade or so ago, these would have just been underwhelming games that just kind of came and went. But now with just how expensive everything is and how long it takes to get all this stuff out, it ends up being this like huge, just slow moving train wreck that people have so much like money and hopes and ambitions tied up in. And it's just, I don't know. It's a unique and interesting situation to me when you compare it to like the flops of the past. So like the first big gaming flop I can remember, at least like being aware of at the time, was Daikatana. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah. Wait, you don't love Daikatana?
Yeah, everyone loves Daikatana. I would actually be interested in revisiting Daikatana to see how it actually is. No, it's so far removed. I don't think it's good. Like, I think
It's
that's
still
a
a
bad
mess,
game,
yeah.
probably.
It's a mess.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
I would be interested in seeing, what specific ways I find it to be a mess now. But yeah. So Daikatana, for anyone who doesn't remember, was John Romero's first big project after he left id, where he and everyone else made Doom, and there was so much hype behind this game, and the marketing was so like belligerent. There was this giant ad in all of the gaming magazines at the time that said John Romero is going to make you his bitch. So,
yeah. Isn't it like all red too? It's like he's in like the fucking kill room.
It's so edgelordy, and it ended up just being a pretty kind of mid to bad like late 90s first person shooter. So this game, it was announced in 1997, apparently released in 2000, which at the time was seen as just like an obscenely long development cycle. So to give you context, Suicide Squad was announced in 2020, released in 2024. So like people were already hating Suicide Squad for longer than the entire like public troubled development cycle of Daikatana. But so Daikatana came out and was just not very good, and so that's why it failed, versus like all these games we've talked about that, say what you will about how boring Skull and Bones looks and how unappealing Suicide Squad and Concord look, but I don't think any of them are really like bad games. They're just kind of games that shouldn't exist.
They're not jank. They're just unfavorable for different reasons. And yeah, I mean, even with like the online co-op shooters or, something like Overwatch or something like that, it's just like the game loop gets tiring. That's really it.
Yeah, they're not good enough. Like, I don't know. I feel like the floor for bad games has raised a lot. I mean, you still get outliers, like whatever that King Kong game that came out last year or whenever it was. Just this horrible jank shit does sneak through occasionally, but that's mostly on like indie shops and everything, like the eShop or whatever. But the floor for bad games has been raised significantly. This could be our old man yells at clouds, but like, I don't know.
The Walking Dead game. I almost forgot about that one. That really jank Walking Dead game.
Yeah, but like you could just go buy whatever random game off of the shelf for like the PS5 or the Series X or whatever, and you're gonna have a much higher chance of getting something that's at least playable and moderately entertaining compared to like the PlayStation 1 era, where it's a complete crapshoot whether you can even get past the second level or it's just a completely broken piece of shit.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, I don't know. I think it is interesting how the modern era of these big flops is going. I mean, you can compare it even to like Duke Nukem Forever, which is, I guess, probably the closest analog, because I don't think anyone really expected that to actually come out and be good. It was very public, like for a very, very long time. I think people were generally just very surprised that it came out at all. Did you? Were you
I don't know.
DNF hype cycle?
I mean, I was, but I think it was just cope for the franchise. And I don't, Duke Nukem is kind of a weird one because of how many like different iterations of Duke there are and how those games work. And, like your side scroller versus like your Serious Sam or whatever. But yeah, like we didn't have like the mismanagement of like these franchise characters as much at the time, especially with like Duke Nukem 3D and how much content rolled out for that game and how good it was like consistently. But yeah, like I think there was doubt, especially with how long and how it continued to get delayed. And yeah, it's pretty weird game. I think the timing is so important with like the popularity of these franchises too. So, Mario is like eternal. Like Mario can never change. But, like Concord playing off this Guardians thing, they at the time that was probably still like pretty hot. Like, so why not go for it if they think it'll sell? But you know, even then they might have rejected that. Like the greater community might have rejected a game like that anyways. So I don't know. It's a gamble in that way, but
Yeah.
Duke Nukem is a weird franchise in general. It's just not been super consistent in its lifespan.
No, it came out not quite out of the gate, because I guess 3D wasn't the very first game in the series, but for all intents and purposes, like it arrived on the scene with undisputed classic, and then just sort of floundered around a little bit, and then turned into Duke Nukem Forever. I think the world is ready for a Duke Nukem revival. I could see that happening.
Wasn't there a more recent like side scroller? They went back to the side scroller titles.
I think there
like
was some kind of little like testing the waters type thing, but yeah. It just
I'm
doesn't need to be a big hulking AAA behemoth, which kind of brought me in a very scatterbrained and rambly way to my question with all of this stuff, with these kind of slow moving disasters and the age of flops. I'm gonna repeat that title because I thought of it once and I was like, man,
I'm gonna trademark it.
Yeah, that could be a cool title. But
Drew's Age of Flops.
Hell yeah. So I'm probably just repeating things we've said like 1,000 times on here already, but I just wonder if modern AAA development is just inherently unsustainable, and if this kind of thing is going to just keep happening. Like I just feel like so many of these things are already in motion. Like they had to be put in motion 5-10 years ago to actually get released at some point, to get a project actually onto shelves or onto the digital marketplace at this point. And I don't know, man. I don't know if gaming executives are just like so out of touch and bad at predicting where the market's going to go, because like clearly none of them predicted Elden Ring or Baldur's Gate coming out. Like who could have predicted that just making a big good game that people want to play would be a good way to succeed?
Who would have thought? Yeah, that you don't have to constantly feed money into to get cosmetics or whatever, you know, get a boost in the game. Just play the game and unlocks things, and maybe get additional content for given how good it was initially. You know, I think they kind of like Cyberpunk remedied that with their DLC, and they like got some good faith back with implementing that in the way they did. But yeah, it makes me wonder too, when you get different workflows, different offices, different management styles, and you know, like maybe this Black Flag wannabe, what the fuck is this game called? Skull and Bones. Maybe that's
Bones
stuff,
and Skulls, like, yeah. Boats and Hoes.
Maybe they're just like an awful, it sounds like it would have been an awful work environment if it was going on that long and dragging out to that degree. And, you know, oh shit, what was I going to say? And then it was dragging out to such a degree that they were developing it past like it being relevant. You know, like it's not even like working for modern consoles at this point.
Right.
And then they do damage control and they say, "Oh, well, this game's bigger than AAA." They start doing these really bad marketing things instead of just kind of shuffling it out, which I think would be better than them like trying to oversell it.
Yeah.
I think that hurts their reputation and sales more, but it's a Ubisoft tactic, so I can't be surprised by it.
Right. I kind of wonder if the industry as a whole is actually going to learn from these things and then course correct a little bit, or if they're just going to keep happening. Because, I mean, like I said, there's just, with how long it takes to make these kind of games, like there are, I'm sure, so many projects like this in the pipeline now that could be unveiled like 3 years from now if they keep on task, and everyone's just gonna be like, why is this happening? And
yeah, we don't even want this game. Like, we're screaming and telling you we don't even want it, And they're like, look forward to April, man. It's going to drop it. We're going to put it out in April. You guys are going to love it. It's like, no. But in just on the idea of like, you know, scaling back or doing more indie style games, we talked about it before, like the Blumhouse Productions foray into video games and stuff like that. I think that's like probably the best I've seen a company try to step into this, like the gaming market, is like just actually hire like a few indie studios to make some games and see if there's even interest there.
Yeah,
because then you're not spending 8 years developing a game that has subpar graphics by the time it comes out.
Right. Yeah. And it's just like, I don't know. It seems like trend chasing with games could almost be at a point where it will be dead, because it's just it takes so long to create the game that by the time it comes out, that trend will have been 3 trends ago. Like with all this live service stuff that is for some reason still trickling out.
Well, it kind of, yeah, I just, even in concept, like the way this stuff happens, like this cycle of like Breath of the Wild likes, or you know, hero shooters, looter shooters. They tried it with that Avengers game. We didn't even mention that horrible Avengers game. That was it. And honestly, that one just like, it had potential as well, sort of like Anthem. But they tried to pad it out so fucking much that it was like unbearable to play. Because I probably put like 10 hours into it, and it just is just dragging, just not enjoyable. So I don't think it is those, like, it's not just the elements of, obviously maybe we'll see this with the Star Wars game, but it's not just live service. It's not just microtransactions or whatever, because we've seen that work well with something like Helldivers 2. And I think we need to be honest and have like some nuance about that kind of shit. But it seems like those greedy tactics overlap with the game being bad and unenjoyable.
Yeah, they can. And like you mentioned Bethesda earlier, Fallout 76 had a pretty dicey reaction from the gaming press, although I think people in general liked it, but it's still going and has a pretty healthy community, and it has a lot of those predatory monetization tactics that are really gross to me. Like it's got its own like $10 a month subscription service to have a private world and shit like that. That's just, ugh, why?
Yeah.
But like that stuff is not inherently a killer in terms of sales. Like even with all that gross stuff, Fallout 76 is still doing fine, along with however many other examples. It's just, it was a game that people wanted to play. So
isn't that the general reaction, like when they implement Creators Club, like they just brought it they're bringing it to Starfield, and everyone was like, fuck. No one wanted that, but they're like, hey, here we go. You know, they're so excited to give it to you because it'll generate, they know some kid out there is going to be dumping money into that stuff.
Yeah, and it's like, no one wants it, but people still want it. Like everyone says they don't want it, but those things are still doing really well. So I don't know. It
doesn't negate the whole game.
No, yeah, they're I guess smarter about it, or have more business acumen than the people that decide to send Skull and Bones or Concord out to die, I suppose.
Well, I think the thing about Concord was they didn't want to make it free to play, and they didn't want to have microtransactions in it. But it is that,
which are good things.
Yeah, like those elements are good, but even then it being like a shameless hero shooter Overwatch knockoff with like not like unendearing characters, like just not interesting characters in general, like that That's not enough to rope people in, apparently.
I know, who would have thought? So I guess to kind of wrap it all up in the form of a question, I'm going to put you specifically on the spot and hold you to this.
I hate this part of the show.
Is this going to continue happening, or are we kind of, was this like the watershed moment that's going to lead the gaming industry to get some sense and stop doing this kind of thing? And by this kind of thing, I just mean these general, like, huge, God, why are you putting this out here thing? Not necessarily live service, because I do think that stuff is on its way out and has been for a while. But yeah. Is this a unique era, like a unique moment in gaming, or just the start of something that's going to keep happening?
Of just flops, like these like
extremely like
8-year development flops. Is that what we're specifically saying?
These big 8-year like really high profile moments of lucidity where the entire culture is collectively like, well, that shit's gonna fail, and then it does.
No, I don't think it's gonna stop. I think we're gonna have that for a while now. We got another 6 years at least, is my prediction. I think there's a chance that like we'll get a lot of really good AAA games. Like if I were to like put my ear to the ground, like try to feel the vibration of the gaming universe, I would point to something like that Captain America and Black Panther game. If that is anything as like on the level of spectacle of like the Uncharted games and graphics quality and all that stuff, I think that could be like, you know, like a lock-in for good single player, not even single player, just like big AAA games that bring like the whole community in. Obviously we have exceptions, like we have stuff jumping out now like Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3, and I think that a lot of game companies will approach that and do stuff like that. They're going to try to make those bigger, better games that also keep the player base there for a while. But I think they're going to continue to put out big shitters too. And they're going to be like these kind of projects that no one is really asking for. I guess no one really asked for a Captain America game, but I think that'll be like one of those things where it's like there's a market there for it. There's desire to play that game. It may work that way for this Marvel Rivals game too, if the reception stays as good as it's been. But
I can see that.
I think they're gonna divvy, like, and we kind of see this with Ubisoft doing the thing with Prince of Persia. Like, they're gonna make these smaller indie offshoot titles that run like in the $40 range or whatever, and then they're gonna have they
did that with Assassin's Creed 2 with Mirage. Yeah
exactly. And like they should split up Mirage. And Mirage is probably gonna blow up in their face for different reasons, you know. It's gonna be outrage against the game in general. It's not gonna matter like if it has microtransactions or a fucking season pass or anything
you talking
like
about
that.
Shadows?
Oh yeah, sorry. God, these titles get confusing. Yeah, I'm talking about Shadows. I'm talking about the new one.
Which is gonna get some people angry, but I don't think it will, you know, flop necessarily. I think it's gonna do pretty well. But it'll have a contingent of the internet mad about something or other. Probably a few different contingents mad about different things.
Yeah, and we'll have that, but yeah, it's not going to be like a united, like, fuck this game, no one's buying it, because I'm always surprised to see that when it's like there aren't the people who are like, oh, I'm playing this game and I like it. Like there's always someone who shows up in that conversation like, I'm enjoying it, I don't think it's that bad. But you don't see a lot of that for your Kill the Justice Leagues and shit like that. So
not so much. I do see it for Concord, but not really.
Basically what I see about Concord is it's just like kind of mid. You know, it's not
This is
it's
fine.
not outrage. It's just disinterest.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think we'll see more of that with like maybe with this Star Wars game, but definitely with other new IPs that they try to roll out in this way.
Yeah, I think that it's going to ebb and flow. I don't think we're going to get as stacked a year as this with all of these high profile failures, just because that specific well has dried up to a point that should be obvious to anyone. And since the tides are kind of shifting back towards these big expansive single player games, I think the industry in general is going to kind of revert it into that as more of a safe bet, and we're going to see fewer and fewer of these for right now until the next big thing comes along that, you know, shows all these dollar signs and has these obvious ways to monetize people and just draw cash out of the whales, because that seemed like kind of a unique phenomenon with the way Fortnite and all of those caught on in a way that could hook these people with these constant microtransactions. I think they're going to keep kind of feeling around and trying to find a way to actually have some of that shit catch on in these single player games they're putting out, but I feel like until there is another Fortnite level event in the gaming world, I think that this specific type of failure is going to slow down some until, you know, like I said, we get that thing where people are like, oh, okay, well, that made, you know, as much money as the entire net worth of several small countries. So let's just fucking keep doing that shit. Because I think,
that.
Yeah, we're at the point now where they have to realize that I guess we can't just copy that. So we'll go back to doing this other thing that's a little bit safer and going to make a return on investment, even if it's not going to give us, you know, retirement money for the next 15 generations of my family.
No, and what I was going to say is they're going to, they've been doing it for a while. And like Capcom is also pretty guilty of doing shit like this. When I bought Deus Ex the other day, I mean, I got like the whole package like on sale for pretty cheap, but it has a season pass.
Oh, everything does.
Like,
yeah.
Why the fuck do I need a season pass for this kind of game? So, you know, they try to implement it where they can, but it's a question of like, is the entire game contingent on it? Because like for Fortnite, it definitely is. Like you have to be up with it and play it every season and have all. I mean, I don't, I don't personally, but it's there, you know.
Yeah.
I think we'll get like a big stinker flop, like bloated ass game, maybe 2 per year moving forward, and maybe not like back to back like it's been, but who knows? Maybe there are some developers that are like doing damage control and course correcting right now. We'll just have to see.
We'll have to see, but I think that's probably about all I can say about these. I was gonna say terrible games, but I don't even think they're terrible. They're just misguided. They're misunderstood,
undesirable.
The undesirables. Yes, we'll just cordon them off, put them in a cage somewhere, and society will be better off without having to talk about Skull and Bones or the Suicide Squad or Concord anymore.
I can talk about those games. I don't want to talk about Skull and Bones. Fuck that game. I'll talk about Concord. Like I think you could maybe like do a thesis on Concord and everything that has gone wrong here. But for everything for Skull and Bones, I don't want to ever like think about that game again.
No, my day was made a little bit worse by remembering that it existed when we were doing this.
Same.
So I'm going to try to avoid that. Yeah. But, oh, well, next episode, we're going to talk about something that I do want to talk about, that my day is made a little bit better by remembering it exists. Yeah. So you should come join us next week when we talk about Disco Elysium.
Tequila Sunset Simulator, here we go.
Do you pronounce it Elysium or Elysium? Because I think they say Elysium in the game. Yeah, I think they actually say Elysium, but it feels wrong.
They've got like some European accents and stuff in there, but I've always said Elysium.
Same.
Elysium, I guess could be right too. I don't know. I'm from West Virginia, man. I don't overthink the words.
Yeah, I try. Like, it's
just
a miracle
fall
I
out.
could pronounce that word at all. Even if it's a wrong
Right.
pronunciation, just the fact that it comes out is worthy of commendations. So
I think we were getting shit for Sekiro.
see, I
Sekiro.
always called that Sekiro, and then I heard everyone on the internet call it Sekiro, so I'm like, okay, I've been doing it wrong all my life, and then I call it Sekiro, and people are like, can't even pronounce the game. That's what a Souls like. Fuck off.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not sure. Just be fluent in Japanese, god damn it.
Damn it. Is that so much to ask?
How dare you? Who cares? Anyways, yeah, I think that's about it for me.
Same. Yep. So appreciate you. Ratings, reviews, blah, blah, blah. Thanks for joining us. I'm out.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.